You are listening to American Wag, where the mind is respected and the truth is sometimes detected.
Cut and edit as necessary. Let's go. All right. How you doing, brother?
It's good, man. How are you?
It's been a while since we chatted.
Too damn long.
I know. You know, I think our white supremacy one got a hit.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I've already got a topic picked out today.
Okay.
And since you're a strange dude and I'm a strange dude, we're going to talk about what's it like to be a Jew but not a Jew, and what's it like to be black and not black. In other words,
I like that.
How do you negotiate your lived experience,
right,
with if you go against the grain?
Yeah.
How do you individuate yourself outside of the box of what people talk about when they talk about Jews?
That's a good one, and that's an interesting freaking question. So just to put a stake in the ground and sort of locate myself, let me turn this on. Dad's German Jew.
Okay.
Classic, like lost a bunch of family in the war.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of the family survived, so yay them. And Mom is Hispanic and arguably at some level Native.
Okay.
They met when she was waiting. They were both waiting table, and he was playing in a jazz band in Yosemite.
Oh, wow.
After the war.
Okay.
And there you go, right?
Wow.
So off to the races we are.
So technically you're not
Technically, I'm not Jewish.
But you're culturally Jewish.
But culturally
somehow.
Jewish because I grew up both in my dad's family, right, who are kind of archetypical New York Jews.
Okay.
My aunt and uncle were kind of very pivotal in raising me, and I spent a lot of time living with them.
Okay.
And also because I grew up in West LA and Beverly Hills,
okay,
which is, at the time, right,
mm-hmm.
was Ashkenazi German. The mainstream culture there was Ashkenazi German Jewish.
So you speak a little Yiddish?
A little bit of Yiddish. I understand more, and a fair amount of Spanish.
Okay, and German?
No German.
No German.
No German. Nothing. Nobody in the family except the members who still live back in Germany speak German.
Okay. So Danziger means your family is from Danzig?
In theory, yes, but there is a Danziger kind of family tree who apparently are all kind of like, rabbinical scholars.
Oh, okay.
Right, who, are all from that area.
Oh,
and it's it's one of those areas that it's Prussia, it's Poland, it's Germany, it's Russia, it's Prussia,
Right.
And it's kind of like what nationality it's a mess.
Wow.
And so I think that the two things about it are that I've never had, and this is also a consequence of my weird upbringing, right, where I grew up in LA and I was partially brought up by a couple of guys that worked for my dad who were black and lived in South Central. And there's elements of kind of Jewish culture that just puzzle the hell out of me. I remember I was in a high school I was not in the game, but I was at a high school basketball game.
Okay.
And a friend of mine was playing for Beverly High. And I don't remember which high school we were playing. It was prominently black high school.
Okay.
And I think it was like my first year of high school.
I would guess it might be Hamilton. Hamilton
could
would
be
have
Hamilton.
been in your league.
Yeah, it could be Hamilton. I again, don't remember any of this.
Okay.
And what I remember is the black kids started shit-talking Jews. Right, as part of the chants,
okay.
right, that are going on. And I remember my first reaction was, oh hell, it's going to be on. Right? There's going to be a brawl.
Right.
And then I look around and all the Jewish kids are sort of sitting back with their heads down.
This was in the 60s?
This would have been in the 60s.
Okay.
And the kids just were not going to have it. They were not responding.
Wow.
And it was odd to me, right? Because in my weird upbringing, if somebody did that, you reacted.
Right.
And it'd be sort of like if the Jewish kids had called out the black kids, right, there would have been a brawl.
Right.
And
I got your Jew right here.
Yeah, right, pretty much,
Yeah.
right? And so like there's elements of kind of that Jewish culture that I'm sort of mildly puzzled and sort of amused by. But I think that part of what you get for it, and I'm betting that it's also part of what you got, is you get this a little bit sense of being an outsider. Like there's like a club,
right?
And you're at the edge of the club, right? You get invited to the parties,
right,
you kind of hang out.
Okay.
But there's a part of the club, there's like rooms within the club that you don't get invited to.
You're not in the center of the Venn diagram there.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's always a little bit of a sense for me of kind of not sadness, but of like wanting to belong, like something about missing out on belonging.
Huh.
Right? And it's fun. You know, it's funny. Like when I was a little kid, my mom's family was Catholic. Right? My dad's family was non-observant Jews.
Okay.
I started going to Jew school and Catholic school.
Okay.
Because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I was interested in this religion stuff, right? I'd read the Bible.
So wait. You called it Jew school, not Hebrew school?
I called it Jew school.
Oh, okay.
And the kids all called it Jew school.
In my neighborhood, we called it religious release.
Right. Which
would take off on Friday, and I'm like, why is this kid get to go? It's religious release.
We had a great thing. We had a documentary that the students made every year in my high school called the Norman Newsreel. We were the Normans.
Oh, okay.
And they had like one of the great laughs they got one year was they walk up to some kid who's wearing a kippah, yarmulke, and they're like, "So what's it like being the only Jew in the school?" Right. Our school was like literally closed for every Jewish holiday. We got like all the holidays off. It was awesome.
Right.
And but the thing for me, and I so why did I do it? It wasn't necessarily spiritual, but it was sort of a desire to belong.
Okay. All right. So it's cool to be. It's not like a Huey Lewis song. It's hip to be Jewish.
Hip to be Jewish. No. Well, I mean, there was the whole bar mitzvah, like massive amounts of swag thing.
Oh yeah. You didn't go.
Nope, none of that. I missed out.
But you studied enough so that you could have.
I could have. If I'd pushed for like another couple years, I could have done it. But I just was like, no, backing out.
Interesting.
But I think it is interesting because you pick up some things about the culture, and there's some things that I got which I think were massively positive. Right? I think that, one of the joys that you get when you're raised in like an upper middle class milieu is you get a sense of possibility. It's like, yeah, you can be a CEO. Like so-and-so's dad's the CEO of a company. He'll tell you about what it's like. Right? Or you can make movies or you can write books because like I know people's parents who do all that stuff. And so the world of possibility is really available to you. And I don't think I really got that. I think the two things that sort of got that to me as a teenager were dealing with some of the black kids I knew from childhood who, like, I'm going, well, why don't you do this? And, I mean, you could just apply. Like, you just do this, right? And they're like, well, no, I can't do that. I'm like, why not? Right?
Interesting.
And it's just sort of like the road, they don't see the road that goes from where they are to that place. And I wrote it off for a long time as a racial thing. And my second wife was a daughter of a blue collar family in suburban Wisconsin. Dad was a truck driver, mom's a grocery checker, 6 kids, right? Family divorced. So, I mean, not
underprivileged,
not well off, right? Smart as hell family. Like it was always interesting to me how smart her family was. None of them, she's the first, her sister went to college, dropped out to get married. She made it through college, right? Only one in college, in family to get through school. Only one in the family to move away, right? And her family had exactly the same thing. It was like the idea of possibility, the idea that you'd move to New York, right? Or that you could be something other than a robotics mechanic on the canning line. Right, was just like, well, no, this is what people do. Like, my father did something like this, and this is what I'm going to do, and I might get to be a foreman.
Gotcha.
But it's this weird set of blinders that I'm very lucky not to have been raised with.
Gotcha. So you were aware that you were somewhat Jewish and somewhat Catholic, and but you could see your way around stuff, and it was all kind of optional to you. You were like, I'll do this if I feel like doing it, and if I don't,
pretty much.
Yeah.
And I was always kind of a sort of. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's sort of like I'd hang out with my mom's family or with people I knew in East LA. And again, I spoke enough Spanish to be functional. It's kind of rusted away a lot. But it was sort of like, you're not really from here.
Tell me about the Spanish side of your family.
It's interesting. So the stories are varied, but the thing that we sort of anchor on is that my grandfather was a labor thug who helped found the ILWU, the Longshoremen's Union.
Okay.
He was a longshoreman in the 30s and 40s.
Okay.
And when Harry Bridges started the union, there were 30 or 40 guys who basically went to war because basically the people running the docks tried to kill the people in the unions as well. And he was one of the guys on the union side who went to war. Oh. And my memory of him is pretty funny. He was one of these guys who was like 5'8" by 5'8". Yeah, it was like he had to turn sideways to go through doors. Right.
I can see him. I can see him chomping that cigar.
Yeah, pretty much. He's that guy. And you know, a little bit of a temper. One of my uncles, who was also a longshoreman, missed my first wedding because he went out drinking with some friends the night before and they tore up a bar and he was in jail. And you know, and so he supposedly is descended from one of the original Spanish soldiers who came to California with the Navarro Sierra.
Okay.
And it purportedly, and I've never done homework on this and it'd be fun to do, our family had a big chunk of land in Santa Barbara, Ventura County that we got sort of swindled out of sometime around the turn of the 1900s.
Okay.
And there was like 30 years of litigation. It was like a Bleak House type litigation.
Wow.
You know, that ultimately we lost. And, but, you know, so that's that side. My grandma's family is from northern Mexico. And what we know, apparently, is that they got on the wrong side of Pancho Villa, and she was born as they were fleeing with, like, the family silver.
Huh.
The place where the story branches is that either A, they were originally Mescalero Apache from southern Arizona who were chased out by the soldiers to northern Mexico, where they set up as bandits and were so successful they became rich, got chased out by Pancho Villa. Or they were just somebody who wound up with a little bit of money in northern Mexico and got chased out by Pancho Villa. We don't know the answer on that one. And so basically, she was born, her family ultimately migrated to Santa Barbara, where she met, my granddad when they were young, and they were off to the races, had a bunch of kids. And the kids were, again, really amazing and smart. One of my uncles, who's a longshoreman in Seattle, is known as the longshoreman poet.
Huh.
And wrote some poetry, which isn't my style that I enjoyed, but still like impressive.
Nice.
And
has there ever been a time when you were like saying, I need to reconnect with my roots, or I don't feel authentic, or I need to?
It was the interesting time was when I got out of college. I wanted to go to University of Chicago Law School and study legal theory. And study legal theory.
Oh, legal theory. Okay, gotcha.
Right, so I was going to get a PhD in law, but I couldn't get in.
Okay.
And because I went to Santa Cruz, and all my evaluations, because I didn't have grades, were very similar, which is Mark is such a bright guy, but he's such a pain in the ass in class. We don't know what to do with him. And basically, one of my counselors was like, well, Mark, why don't you just apply as a Hispanic? And tell them you're Hispanic, and you'll get in. And I remember I had this sort of like a week of walking around and thinking about it, and I just couldn't do it. And it was, interesting because I had a long talk with my granddad about it, because he was encouraging me to do it. And I was like, the problem is there's some kid from the Central Valley, right, whose family were agricultural workers. Right, who struggled his way through kind of junior college and managed to get into college and is now trying to go to law school. And I'm going to take that kid's seat. And that seems like bullshit to me.
Okay.
Right? Because I didn't get raised with any of those disadvantages.
So did you think of yourself as a hyphenated American? Were you?
I'm a mutt. The way I've always described myself is I'm a mutt.
Okay.
I am what the future is going to look like.
Okay.
right? When we all intermarry and interbreed, right? Everybody in the world's going to wind up looking pretty much like me.
Okay.
And
hopefully with better hair.
Yeah. Well, and handsomer, but basically, it's one of these things where I've never. I mean, the thing that I've never had is sort of a strong, what I'll call, kind of cultural identity in those ways. I don't particularly feel tied to, farm worker issues. I don't particularly, but it's funny because what I do feel tied to are labor union issues.
Interesting.
Right? I've always been kind of strongly kind of like a union guy.
Did your uncles come home and says, honey, you got to stitch up my knuckles. I had a really bad day at work today.
I'm sure they did. All that had been settled out long before I was born.
Okay.
That was all late 40s, early 50s. And by then it was a different sort of, they were just brawling. But it's one of these things where I've thought about it a fair amount. Like why am I not more rooted in the Hispanic side of things? And I kind of am, right? It's like I have this basic fondness for, that what I see in the Hispanic immigrants here is this incredible sense of sort of entrepreneurship and energy, and I love that. And I feel very much at home with it, but I don't feel like it's kind of part of me. I think and I think it comes from, there's like a Catholic, I read a great history once that talked about how the Catholicism of Spain had really screwed over Latin and Central America.
Interesting.
Because they were very centralized, they were very kind of under control, and they hadn't sort of like had that ferment of freedom that the Protestants got in North America.
Gotcha.
But the one thing I wound up anchoring on is I very much do get anchored on the whole thing of Israel, which is interesting. And I'm trying to figure out why. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why.
Have you been there?
Never been. I should go, and I have. It turns out, so funny sort of story. In the late 30s, early 40s, as things were getting really shitty in Europe, my grandfather's brother, who is some sort of uncle to me, granduncle, great uncle, whatever. I've never.
Grandfather's brother's your great uncle.
My great uncle, thank you.
Yes.
My great uncle wanted to come over from Europe, from Germany, where he lived with his family. And apparently the way it worked at the time is that your sponsor had to sign for you like a FedEx package at the dock.
Okay.
Right? And apparently my grandfather booted the day of the arrival of the ship and wasn't there.
Wow.
And so they got sent back.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, as the story goes, my great-grand aunt, right, was sitting on the boat kind of softly crying about what they were going to face when they went back, when some Hasidic Jew guy walks by and goes, sister, why are you crying? And she just pours the story out, and the guy goes, oh, what does your husband do for a living? He's a bookkeeper. It's funny, I have a factory in Copenhagen, I need a bookkeeper. And so the guy hired him on the spot. They disembarked in Denmark, where a ton of Jews survived because of the graciousness of the people there. They made it through the war. Weren't terribly interested in communicating with the U.S. part of the family.
Yeah, I could see that. Wow.
Emigrated to Israel, and then some went back to Germany, and are there now. One of my cousins is an executive at BMW, and then about 2005 or so, one of the cousins came back over from Israel with her husband, who sings in a classical music choir, who's giving a performance in the East Coast. Dug up one of my aunts, and they had this massively tearful reunion.
Wow.
And then my cousin came to LA, and we hung out, and we become friends. And she's like, when are you gonna come to Israel? And I'm like, I gotta go. And I really do. It's it's high up on the list.
That's a great story.
It's crazy. And so I think the thing with Israel is twofold, right? One is that it is a unique and positive kind of attachment to part of the family past. I think the other piece of it for me is much more kind of, it is they're fighting Jews, as it were.
Right.
Israelis wouldn't have sat in the stands.
Right.
You know, and I think that there's this weird thing about kind of American Jews that makes me kind of disquiet about it.
Did you as you situate yourself among Americans and then American Jews, how do you, what affinities do you find? Is it something, you know, that you feel comfortable? You didn't meet your wife in a Jewish dancing club or anything like that? No,
like, I don't do that sort of cultural stuff about anything, really. I think that the affinity that I have with Jews in America is I'm a verbal, like, you know, conceptual thinking guy. And Jews tend to fall into that bucket.
Okay.
Right? And I think I can talk about the whole cultural history of why and all this sort of stuff. What's interesting is that I'm not incredibly entrepreneurial, right? I sort of don't have that drive. And I've worked for a couple, particularly Israeli Jews, who were like 130, like it turned to 13.
Right. What I wanted to get to is, like, if you perceive anti-Semitism in a way that's personal, or is it just something that you're a sharp observer?
I observe it. It's not personal to me, and it's funny because, you know, the couple times when people have made sort of anti-Semitic comments to me, actually were in France when I lived there, and a couple Arab kids kind of called me out as a Jew on the train, and I sort of commented that, yeah, I'm a Jew, but I'm like an American Jew, and you know what American Jews do?
They shoot you in the head.
Right, we don't take shit. You know, and I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, I have a visceral reaction to people who are bullies. And I think that's kind of where it comes from. And I think whoever I see getting bullied, right, whoever it might be, it's like the classic, you know, a Hispanic family speaking Spanish in a store line, and somebody tells them to speak English. I'm like,
right.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Right? Like, come on, back up. And, you know, just any of that kind of tends to set my teeth on edge. But it doesn't in that way feel personal. And what's fun is I can make myself personal. You know, I have a friend who sort of went on this sort of extended rant. I have left-wing friends who go on extended rants about Jews, and right-wing friends who go on extended rants about Hispanics. And I always go, so you realize that, like, I'm Hispanic. You realize that I'm Jewish. Right. And so you're talking to one.
Right.
You know, but it's entirely like I choose to step into that. It's not like you know, I'm being attacked.
Right. That's an interesting story, Mark. It's I'm glad to hear some of that. It's wild.
It's funny, and I think, like I said, I mean, I have the advantage of not getting bucketed much. Other people don't bucket me much, because literally, like, people think I'm Hispanic, people think I'm Lebanese, people think I'm Arab. You know, I have one of those faces and sort of, you know, complexions that you can read a lot into. And so I can kind of be whatever I want to an extent. So it's never as, oh, Mark, you must be this.
Right.
But it's interesting to me a little bit that I haven't seen more of it. You know, it's interesting to me a little bit that, you know, I haven't seen kind of anti-Hispanic kind of prejudice. It's interesting that I haven't seen, you know, anti-Jewish stuff in my face.
Yeah, it's. I think it has a lot to do with growing up in LA. LA, when I moved to Brooklyn, there was this the Yankel Rosenbaum murder.
Yeah, I remember.
And then Crown Heights.
Yep.
I'm like a black person that, well, you don't want to go over near Crown Heights or what, and I just had no analog.
Yeah.
It was like, I know there's Fairfax, there's Jewish people over there, and I see them all the time when I go over to Melrose, and it's just no big deal.
Yeah.
And I don't even, I didn't even distinguish between the sections of Jews, Reformed Jews,
right.
Jews for Jesus, Ashkenazi.
The ones who throw rocks when you drive by on Saturday.
Right, yeah, I didn't, you know, it was just, okay, they're Jewish people, so.
And I think the thing that you have and it's something I think both of us got, right, as whatever gift we got. I'm going to call it a certain kind of cosmopolitanism,
mm-hmm.
right, which is, you're black, I'm something,
mm-hmm.
right? But ultimately what I am is Angelenos. I'm a Californian, I'm an American.
A California American.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely different growing up here than other places.
Yeah.
People now there's the meme about anti-Asian violence.
Yeah.
And I'm like, which Asians?
Right.
I mean, because if you're from LA, you'll know the Chinese from the Japanese,
from the Koreans,
from the Vietnamese.
That's right.
And if you don't, you're like, what's wrong with
you? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, and it's interesting to me that no other city had roof Koreans. No, but I mean, it's a funny thing, and the roof Korean thing is a funny meme.
It is.
But I've always thought about the fact that there's something about LA that, like, it never didn't happen in New York,
mm-hmm.
didn't happen in the Bay Area, didn't happen in Chicago or Detroit,
mm-hmm.
right? None of those places which had big kind of Asian footprints on the edges of areas that were torn by riots,
mm-hmm.
right? In none of those places did you wind up with people on roofs.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that there's something about that changes your perception kind of who people are, and in kind of a positive way.
Interesting. I remember coming back here after the riots, and I remember the specific Korean businesses that got burned out,
mm-hmm.
specifically.
Yeah.
And I definitely knew the difference of attitudes by Koreans towards blacks as compared to Japanese.
Yep.
And the Koreans were a lot more uptight.
Yep.
And
well, Koreans are by their nature, right?
Yeah, and just a little bit more, tight-ass.
Yeah.
About, I don't know how to put it.
They're just a little more aggro.
Yeah, but also kind of like, there's a movie that I saw, and it's a very complex movie, and it has both Japanese and Korean characters.
Mm-hmm.
But when they are speaking in a common language, it's Korean.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're being formal and uppity,
they speak Japanese.
Then they speak Japanese. And so I think there's that whole kind of difference between those two cultures that are different here as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, I don't know. It's not fair for me to guess based on the 12 or so that I know,
right,
that Koreans are a little bit more self-conscious.
I just think about, I did martial arts with a Korean instructor for, 10 years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, I tell the chair story, right, which is at some point, when you've been around long enough, you get invited to these banquets at Korean barbecue places.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first time a couple of us went, the instructors were all sitting around drinking Jack, right, and just getting hammered. And, and at some point, you can tell, right, they're speaking Korean, but shit is being spoken.
Yes.
And then somebody's up, and then stuff is being thrown across the room. And we're all standing in the corner going, we're going to jail, right? And it's like, what do we do? Like, and like, the people from the different schools, the little white kids are all looking at each other like, are we supposed to do something?
Yeah.
Like, are you okay? I'm okay. I'm just standing right here, right?
That is funny.
And,
funny.
And there's this whole, they are people with a temper, and I respect that.
Mm. Whereas I don't think I've ever seen an angry Vietnamese person.
I've seen angry, but I've never seen them act out in those ways.
Yeah. Just so cool.
Yeah.
Just so mellow.
Just collected, but more than that, it's sort of being collected is a big part of the ethos.
Yeah.
And I think, look. None of us live it. None of us know that much about it. We're visitors in the culture,
right.
And we're all seeing the weird little corners that we see. But I think LA is different in a way.
LA is different. And I would say that my family's definitely going mutt. My oldest daughter's boyfriend Max is Mexican.
Yeah.
And he's just like you say. This energy, entrepreneurial, hardworking dude.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that we have the kind of sophistication that we do, and and my daughters kind of get it from the suburbs that we raised them in. But he's like, my high school was so bad, you know?
Yeah.
When the slow kids, they slowed up the whole school, and we wouldn't finish the subject. And so we just didn't know. And it was a thing not to do well in school. Mm-hmm. And he just, every once in a while, he's quiet, but he's really smart.
Yeah.
The guy's, he trades options, but that's not his business.
Right.
But he just does it for fun. He's telling me, I'm like, I don't really understand that, but
okay.
And he's a really sharp guy, but socially he's shy because he doesn't know the unwritten rules.
Right. He didn't get brought up in the culture
right.
where he's comfortable enough in it to know which fork to use all the time.
Right. And then she is more like, she wants to be a lot more down to earth. Now my other daughter, she's the she's Kira's just Kira.
Yeah.
she's bold. She never loses an argument, and she can just talk you into the ground. and her boyfriend Omri is Israeli.
Yeah.
So his family is from there. They raised on a kibbutz, and they
probably a good match for each other that way.
Yeah. So and they're inseparable.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting for me, having gone through my weird thing with black folks.
I mean, so hypothetically they marry these guys?
Yeah.
And your kids turn out my color?
Yeah.
Or your grandkids?
Yeah.
How does that feel to you? Does that feel like a win or a loss?
My thing has always been, I did the old joke once or twice. I always had a baseball bat right at the front door.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna greet your boyfriends. so one of them I actually did it. Right, I took out a shell and I said, "Here, catch this," and he catches a bullet. It's a 9mm bullet. He says, "Oh, you're pretty good. If you get here after midnight, it's going to be coming a lot faster." But I've never really had any. I'm just like, if my daughter is angry at you, then I'll be angry with you.
Right.
If my daughter's happy with you, then I'm happy.
You're happy.
With you.
But there's no sense of like I have some friends who are religious Jews whose kids have married non-Jews and are outside the pale of Judaism, meaning their kids are like my parents, and there's a sense of loss, like they feel like their community is being diminished. And it's funny because I'm like, well, but is it? I mean,
yeah.
Or is it being strengthened by these alliances and relationships and
I kind of take it as the joining of families. I mean, yeah. I wouldn't be completely objecting to arranged marriages, because ultimately it's like, is my family going to get along with your family? And if that's cool, then I'm cool.
The data shows that arranged marriages actually do better.
Yeah, I wouldn't
over time than the kind of marriages that I've had 3 of.
I wouldn't be surprised. And when I think about America and when I think about Black America, it changes so much that you can't own the culture. I mean, I don't feel like. Well, let me tell you something about myself. Yeah. My father was a movement dude in the 60s, and he helped set up some of the Black student unions on college campuses here, and then went on to work for the county public service, and he helped organize some Black public health workers. So Black public health workers were part of this, and he doesn't remember very well, but next time I go over his house, he's got a wall of plaques in appreciation for the Black Health Leadership Conference, for example. And he helped build King Hospital here. So those things are kind of lost over time. But my point was, he was a radical, and we celebrated Kwanzaa instead of Christmas. It wasn't in addition to.
Interesting.
So there were years when, at the very beginning of Kwanzaa, we were celebrating Kwanzaa, and we had no Christmas tree, and we had Kwanzaa presents.
Yeah.
and we did the libation, and we did the Yuzo Saba. And so I go around, and I'm singing the Black National Anthem, and I'm like, Kuji Kaji Chaji, I can't even say it anymore myself. Nia is purpose, and Imani is hope. And other black folks don't know it.
Yeah.
And I know what it was like to watch my father struggle as he built, the Institute for Black Studies, and we did a theater workshop in our backyard, where there were people who says, I'm not black, I'm a Negro. Don't call me black. And it was an insult, and I remember when it was an insult. On the playground, you say, oh, you're the FBI. Yeah, I'm from the FBI, fat, black, and ignorant. oh, it's like that, And so everybody wasn't instantly say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And so I know what it's like to be kind of in an alternative black culture.
Yeah.
And you expect other black folks are going to be in it just like you, and they're not.
There's an interesting theory I've got. And part of it's based on the experience of my gay friends, right? I'm of an age where, the gay guys I've known for a long time have kind of gone through the whole arc from like going to jail, right, to being kind of like honored. And there's this theme that's come up a couple times in talking to them about the loss of gay culture as being gay has become mainstream. Right, which is that now that you're just a person who happens to like to sleep with people of the same gender, right, like there's nothing special about being gay anymore.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think there is a big loss. Well, because when I think about, I don't know if Rex Reed was gay, but I think he was gay, and there's something I sense when I listen to, I think it's Charles Murray and Andrew Sullivan, that there's a British gay intellectual that has something special. And that's not, I think being gay on the edge of gay culture is very different from being just homosexual.
But see, here's the thing that's sort of interesting about it, and here's where it becomes a fun question, right, that I'm building in my head right now. So if it's stupid, we'll just back away from it carefully.
We'll be stupid.
You'll edit it out. It'll be fine.
No, I won't edit anything out.
I know.
Own your words.
But here's the question, right? Which is, I think that there's a thing in Judaism about the loss of Jews because you're trying to preserve a people, right? And that when you lose, when all the Jews have intermarried, right? Judaism simply becomes a gene, and there's no more Jewish people, as it were.
Yes.
And I think that that's considered an important issue in some circles.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead.
But similarly, I wonder, right? And again, to a certain extent, as being black becomes unremarkable, right? And we're a ways away from there. I'm not saying that being black today is unremarkable, but it's becoming unremarkable.
In certain ways, yeah.
Right? Is there something that's lost?
Yeah, there's something that's lost when you're a jazz fan and you listen to hip hop, and you're like, or you listen to a really good gospel organ player, and you're like, where are we going to replace these people? And there's definitely something in the music. There's definitely something in the cooking and the cuisine.
Yeah.
And there's definitely something in a kind of strength, as you were talking about, the Mexican side of your family, where when I think about my grandmothers, they knew stuff that was old wives' tales, but wit and wisdom in a way that isn't formally educated, but they just know it.
Yep.
And they never misstep. They're not being sophisticates. They're not being a cosmopolitan. There's just something they know that works in New Orleans.
And you lose that, right?
Yeah.
And the thing you lose, right? And so there's the theory I remember talking. My dad was a jazz player, right? He was a jazz, not a very great jazz drummer, but played jazz, knew tons of people in jazz and in music. And there's this whole theory about jazz grows out of the black experience because it's an expression of suffering and limitation, right? That if I'm a brilliant white musician, I can go to Juilliard, right? I can play for the Met Opera. I have all the options in the world of doing whatever I want, right? I can play pop music. I'm all these things. In 1930, right? I'm a really talented black musician.
Right.
I'm not going to get invited to audition for the Met.
Right.
Right. My choices are fewer. And so what you do is you distill that talent into new genres of music and crazy expressions of creativity that come out of the fact that we kind of fuck these people's lives over.
Yes and no.
Okay.
You know the story about the Yokel Boxer?
No.
Well, there's a story about a Yokel Boxer. I think this is in the beginning of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And and the story goes is, the sophisticated boxer, he knew the sweet science.
Yeah.
And then the yokel was getting beat down and all the money was changing hands. And suddenly the yokel stood up and he understood the other boxer's timing.
Yeah.
And he got inside of him and he stepped inside of his frame
this.
or time and knocked the guy cold.
Yeah.
And the guy didn't even know how he was being hit.
Right.
And there's something about the music, says George Clinton, that gets into your pants. But that is musical genius. And you don't just get musical genius out of an experience of frustration or oppression.
No, you have the musical genius.
Right. But the guy, one of the guys whose names I'm trying to is telling you, he worked with Schoenberg, and he was saying, your academies don't have a language that explains what I do.
Right. Duke Ellington, I think is.
But I know what I'm doing. No, it wasn't Ellington.
Okay.
It's his name is Barry somebody.
Okay.
And I just discovered this guy.
Yeah.
And he was, he's teaching. There's a bunch of videos on YouTube of him teaching other kids what he understands about chord changes.
Yep.
And it's deep musical theory, I can tell. And he's just like, he is speaking everything, and you listen to him, and you won't get it for a long time.
It's a different language than the
right.
Yeah.
So it's just stuff that has not been put into a formal.
But it's
language.
kind of the question.
Language deceives you, and as soon as you put it into words, you lose the essence of something.
But it's kind of an interesting question that I'm now hung on this question of. My theory of the world has always been that the desirable endpoint, right, the place we want to get to, is a place where it's unremarkable to be whatever. Right? Oh, you're black, great. You're Asian, your family's Asian, great. You're gay, whatever. Right? Like whatever you are, are you a good neighbor? Do you frickin' keep your lawn up? That's all I care about. Right? Bring your cans in, keep your lawn up. Right? Don't party too late at night on a school night.
You're so middle class.
I'm all about the bourgeois values, dude. But as that happens, as that becomes unremarkable, there's a loss of something.
Yeah, I always look at the loss of skill that you get, that we witness. Why cars all cost $30,000 today?
Right.
Because they have AM, FM, power steering, power brakes, power windshield wipers, power windows,
which was this crazy luxury
radar
stuff
in the in your rear view mirrors.
Yeah.
Somebody took off my wife's rear view mirror or side mirrors on the street.
Yeah. It
had a bit of radar in it. It cost $700 to replace. And I'm like, really? I'm looking at this car across the street. It has a light in the side view mirror.
Yeah.
And where we used to have curb feelers.
Yeah.
Now we have LiDAR and a rear view camera that bends the lines when you turn your steering wheel. And now you're going to have self-driving cars.
So we're getting stupider is what you're saying.
We're getting stupider because we've paved over everything that makes a difference.
That makes it hard that teaches us.
Yeah.
But put that aside, because there's I think they're parallel issues, but they're slightly different. Right? I'm not talking about what it means as an individual to not have life skills, because the world is pushing
about what
for you.
a class of people don't get.
But it's not just a class of people, it's the idea of a community of people. And the question to me is the question of, what does it mean to lose a community that's based in suffering, in a sense? What does it mean to lose a community that's based in exclusion?
I'll tell you what it means for me.
Yeah.
It means for me, when I grow up in my neighborhood with my dad, and I better have the house clean or else.
Yep.
And then I go to a Fortune 50 company, and my boss tells me we really have to have this deadline or else. I'm like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? So there's this subtle stuff that they expect. I don't know exactly what the consequences of failure are within this. I'm not going to get a raise in 6 months.
Right.
There's no sense of a threat.
Right. It's not like I'm going to get my ass whipped and sent to my room for a week.
Right. It's like. Yeah.
But I think there's another part though, which is, and again, you're marching down the thread of hardship makes us stronger and fragility, right?
Yes.
And we're raising ourselves and our kids
Yes.
in a world without hardship, because that's our goal as a parent. I want my kid to have no hardship.
Right. And when I look at that historically, I look at what a German Jew who comes over here in 38, what he knows in the old country, and then what a GI who comes back in 47 says, oh, it's a party now.
Yeah.
So the kids who were born, the baby boomers, were born in a world that wasn't at war.
Yeah.
And they don't know what war is.
But I think we will. But I think, but again, I want to come back to this communitarian thing. I want to anchor on this.
All right.
And it's fascinating as I think about it, because.
Can we take a break for a minute?
Yeah, of course.
All right. Johnny Carson says, and we are back. I'm flipping my pencil.
So the communitarian thing. So let's talk about gay people for a minute, because there's a group within the gay community that's defined themselves now as queer.
Yeah.
Right? Because the point is not to be a same-sex couple living on my suburban block with 3 kids and like problems with the PTA like normal parents have. The issue is I'm supposed to somehow radically restructure my life around my sexuality because otherwise I just become part of the mainstream. And I wonder sometimes in racial communities as well, right? If let's talk about Jews for a minute in this case, right? Where there's groups of Jews. You've seen in the last 20 years, conservative Judaism has gotten stronger as Reform Judaism has gotten weaker.
Yeah.
Right? People want that kind of anchor.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise I'm just another guy who,
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that the thing I think about with Black culture particularly, right? Black people's experience in America has been kind of horrific. I think it's fair to say, right? Looking back, right? I think about, so Joe and Theodis were these guys that worked for my dad.
Right.
Rural Louisiana, grew up, pre-war and during the war.
Right.
And told me stories about what it was like to be like a 13-year-old black kid in rural Louisiana at that time.
That is a different world.
And I will tell you that I literally thought they were making these stories up to scare me.
Yeah.
Right? I did not believe the things they told me were true. I thought these were like horror stories that you told to scare kids.
Yes.
Right? And I remember the moment when like the switch flipped and I realized, no, this is what they lived through.
Yes.
Right? That I was like, fuck. Right? I mean, it's still to this day like,
yeah.
It's like, oh, come on, no, that never happened.
Right.
What?
Right. Yes.
Right.
I know exactly what you mean. I have a relative on my wife's side, and I literally went back to my grandmother funeral in Monroe, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And same thing, same story of, we used to have a bunch of land here that we were promised.
Yeah.
And we got in a lawsuit and we lost all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I talked to one of my cousins, and he told me why he left there. And he's like, we used to pick cotton here, and we used to go to the gin, and we'd put our thing on the scale, and it says 500 pounds. He says, we're going to pay you for 200 pounds of cotton.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah. And it was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that stuff is traumatizing.
No, absolutely.
There's no way you get away from that.
No, it's like, so I want to anchor for a minute, like put a pin in that fact.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Other people in this country, right, have horrific histories as well.
Yes.
Right. So hypothesize for a minute that my mom's stories about, Apache ancestry are true.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. Those people got fucking run out of the country by soldiers and murdered as they ran.
Yep.
Right. The Mexican people who lived in California when the white folks took it over, right? Whatever they had, they lost.
They didn't get a discount.
They didn't get a discount. Right. Asian folks who came over here, in the 19th century, right? Like those stories are horrible. I read a really interesting book about the Black Plague in San Francisco back around the time of the gold rush. And we very nearly had like an outbreak where it broke out of San Francisco into the broader country. Mm-hmm. And they narrowly avoided it. Mm-hmm. But part of what they talk about is the living conditions that Asian folks were in San Francisco at that time. Mm-hmm. And it blows your mind. They're living in dirt basements dug out under buildings in downtown San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And, and so there's I can trace different folks' histories back.
Right.
And there's horror somewhere in everybody's story.
Right.
And that's not to diminish any one of the horrors, but it's to say that we all have them. We all have them in our closets.
Well, yeah, I guess ultimately the question is, where do we choose to live?
Well, but that's the point. But let me tie a knot, because that's exactly where I'm trying to go, which is we have these things in our closets. Some more recent and worse than others. Mm-hmm. And part of what those stories do is they tie us together as a community. Mm-hmm. Right? Jews are pretty strongly tied together by the whole Holocaust thing.
I'd imagine.
Right? So. It's like, I lost my, you lost on, here's the picture of all the family with like the left side of the picture's gone. Mm-hmm. Black people are tied together by slavery and the history that followed Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. Right? Asian people are tied together by the Asian laws and we pick this thing, right? And that they bind us as much as they limit us. Mm-hmm. And so what I get out of this limitation is I get a community, and I get a legend and a story that tells me who I am in a way that matters.
Yes.
And and think of like Ralph Ellison, right? Or James Baldwin, right? Their stories came out of that place. Mm-hmm. And what starts to happen as you move to Santa Clarita, right, with your Mexican or Asian partner, right, is those stories kind of lose their power all of a sudden, right? They're not as powerful to you as they would be if you lived in Crenshaw,
right?
And so what happens is there's this trade-off, and part of me keeps thinking about. I'm a big fan of Nabokov, the Russian writer. And he has this great preface to the book Lolita, which is actually a very funny and sad book, right? It's a great novel. It is actually a great novel.
One of these days, I'll
it's worth it. And what winds up happening is the hero at the end of it commits a murder and is imprisoned. Okay. And the preface to the book is by a psychologist who's interviewing him in jail. And he talks about the fact that if this guy had sought out psychological care early in the story, there would have been no tragedy, there would have been no murder, but there also would have been no novel.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's this question, right, about, take somebody who's a conservative Orthodox Jew, right, by hanging on to their Judaism that way. Right. On one hand, they isolate themselves from the rest of the world. They create this me-them kind of tension and communitarian tension. On the other hand, right, they get a community out of it.
Yeah.
And they get an identity out of it that they might not have otherwise.
Yeah, that's a strange thing. I mean, I'm trying to be conflicted about it, but I'm not.
I'm on one side.
Because my side is Matthew Henson was my hero as a kid.
Matthew Henson.
Exactly. Nobody knows who Matt Henson. He got Peary to the North Pole.
Awesome.
And he went back for fun. All right. So Matt Henson is a black explorer, you know.
Yeah.
And his story is a hero story.
Yep.
And I am so attracted to hero stories.
Mm-hmm.
I am so attracted to overcoming against the odds. I am so attracted to looking forward to how I'm going to make this better, that when I understand that there's trauma, I'm saying, what does this do to hold you in place? Because if you leave Monroe, Louisiana, there is no cotton gin.
That's right.
So you don't have a community where that makes sense anymore. And are you going to see that as I'm losing a part of myself, or are you going to see it as the burdens of my heart are rolled away? So there are people who don't want to come to Jesus. There's people who want to live with their suffering.
Yep.
And they want to absolutely feel that pain. I mean, I watched this stupid TV show, and the whole series revolves around this orphan young woman who is a rebel, and she fucks up, and somebody pays the price with their life.
Yeah.
And they're saying, we need your help. We need you to put that behind you. We need you to stop blaming yourself. Get up, wipe your tears. No, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it. And everybody has to die.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the bad news of the past has to die.
Yeah, I
and
think
sometimes you can't raise kids on the notion of this was so horrible in our past that it stopped me from
Well, I think that's kind of the story, right? And it's, you know, today, right? It's something that is of the moment around Black culture, because for whatever reason, Black culture has sort of stepped forward as the definitive minority culture. And it's interesting.
We wanted that.
I know, and it's interesting to me.
I meant to do that.
And it's funny to me because it's happening just at the time, and I'll speak out as my proud Latino self, right? That Latinos have become the kind of politically and economically dominant minority in America.
Yeah.
And, you know, followed closely by Asians, right?
Mm.
And sort of it, you know, there's this kind of moment of Black folks going, well, hey, man, we're the freaking minority here. Like, yeah. Like, who are you newcomers?
It's tough, and it's tricky, and it's becoming more diffuse.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, in my professional career, I am the one for whom America is easy.
Yeah.
As compared to my South American co-workers,
mm-hmm.
as compared to my Indian co-workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ease with which I get along in the mainstream or with affluent people, I think of it as something, and there's a Sikh walking down the block here.
Yep. And he's around.
And that makes me something of a model.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a, and I'm looking at this now. There's a point at which the yokel versus the sophisticated,
mm-hmm.
the yokel knows something,
mm-hmm.
and they know it very well.
Mm-hmm.
They're a hedgehog, but you take them out of their environment, and then they become kind of useless. And the question of social mobility is really tight in that.
Well, I think
how far can you take it?
I think the question is, can the yokel repurpose that you know, the one trick pony, mm-hmm. right? Can I take my one trick, mm-hmm. and can I use it in a different way, mm-hmm. or can I use the strength it gives me in a different way, right? What can I do with it other than the one thing it's meant for?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I grew, you know, this is not me, but you know, I grew up in a family that did manual farming, right? We were sustenance farmers in Central America, and we came to the States. And can I use that work ethic to build a janitorial business?
Yeah.
Right? Can I use that? Like this shit's easy. Are you kidding me? Compared to fucking working in the sun.
Right.
You know, and so how do I repurpose that skill? And I think the thing is, you and I are both very much on team cosmopolitan in a way.
Yeah.
Right? I think a world in which everybody looks like me and kind of operates in the same headspace as me is kind of a cool world.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
it's cool because there's the rest of the world.
Right. We lose something for it though, and I want to acknowledge what we lose.
Yeah, you do. You can't go home again.
Right. Exactly right.
You cannot.
Right.
And so you have a vested interest. Excuse me. In the diversity of your core. If it's an ethnic core, you want ethnic diversity. And there are failures all up and down the chain. So I often think about A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was the hero of the labor movement.
Mm-hmm.
But something happened when, airplanes went up instead of trains.
Yep.
A. Philip Randolph did not get a union
around stewardesses.
Nope. Because it was a long time before there were black stewardesses.
That's right.
And something happened maybe with the Hilton family that we're not aware of, that there was not a black janitorial hotel restaurant management thing, because we were all the bus boys, we were all the maids, we were all of the I mean, every part of a hotel.
Except the front of the house.
Exactly. And there's a huge industry of hospitality that we would have known.
Yep.
Because I talk to people, my age, who says, my mother was a washerwoman.
Yeah.
She took in laundry. And why are we not owning all the laundry? So
well, that's the Spike Lee kind of like, why do the Koreans own the corner stores? Why don't we own the corner stores?
Because our generation did not want to. Our generation did not want to go back to the manual labor. We wanted to get into corporate America. We didn't want to.
Well, that was the out for the first cohort of black people who got let out.
Right.
Got jobs in the post office.
Right. But there was not a link between the junior management and the upper management.
Absolutely.
And that may come around in my kids' generation, so that there will be a kind of top to bottom.
But I also think the thing that's interesting to me is that somehow there are these waves of black entrepreneurialism, if you look back at history, and they somehow never built. Right? And I think part of it was flat out racism. Right?
Yeah.
In that black people were just kept from owning stores and kept from having the capital to do stuff.
Yeah, part of it.
And part of it is a cultural thing, which always interested me, which is, if you look at Hispanic, Jewish, Asian as the other kind of like, we'll talk about them as parallels, they all buy from each other. Hispanic families buy shit from stores owned by other Hispanics, right? Asian stores bought by other Asians. Jews from stores bought by other Jews, right? And that built-in market is what sustained a lot of the baby entrepreneurs. Right? I've got a clothing store, and my cousin is going to send his kids over to buy suits, right? Because that's who you buy from, right? Or I've got a fish market, and my buddies with restaurants are all going to come buy from my fish market because that's how you do it, right? And so there were these like inter-ethnic economic webs that never grew in the black community.
I'll tell you why.
Tell me.
Because there were house Negroes and field Negroes. And the house Negroes knew they were close enough to white folks to get behind their BS. And they knew it. And they could see through it.
Yeah.
And so they knew the moment that those people were asleep or they could get free, then they'd be free. All right? So the moment integration happened for real, a lot of people were like,
I'm out.
I'm out. I'm gone. Because I don't want to have to deal with this field BS.
See, this is the
and it's just, and I see it not something special about black folks in particular, or black culture in particular, just the size.
So what's interesting, this is what I call the deed restriction theory. I've heard this from other people. So when black people all lived around Central Avenue,
Yep.
right, and they couldn't buy land anywhere else,
Yep.
in LA,
Yep.
right? Because if I look at this property, I'm willing to bet there was a deed restriction on this property,
Yep.
right? Somewhere back in the chain of title,
Yep.
right? Black people couldn't buy here,
I know.
right? So you had black dentists and black doctors and black lawyers who lived 3 blocks away from black laborers, from black washerwomen, from people, from people who had the lowest level jobs.
Right.
And so the kids of the people who had the lowest level jobs, first, that meant their businesses were in that area, right? So there was a web of businesses there that they could shop from.
Yep.
Then what happened was the kids also saw these other people and had role models out, and they had the social connections to meet somebody who would like help them get into a school, which they don't have today. Then we lift the deed restrictions, and poof, all the middle class black people want to go live with middle class other folks someplace else.
Yep. That's what happened. I asked my dad. I said, because my dad loves his father, still talks about it.
Yeah.
I said, Chico was an elk, right? Oh yeah, he was an elk, and he was a Mason, and he was in a local Yale fraternity, and he knew all the Episcopal black ministers and deacons in New England. And those were his boys.
Yeah.
I said, why didn't you do that? He said, I didn't want to do any of that. It's like my grandfather had a network of people
He had social capital that your dad didn't pick up and take.
that he wasn't interested in.
Interesting.
And you if you get an old copy of Ebony magazine, once a year they'll do the 100 most influential black people.
Okay.
And there'll be these Masons and these Elks and these Shriners and Grand Pole March of Omega Psi Phi fraternity.
Yeah.
And they're like 100 black men of Los Angeles, and the Lynx, and oh geez, I'm forgetting some of these
Right.
old groups. But there were, in the 40s, before World War II, before the Army integrated,
Right.
there were a host of black professional organizations, the National Medical Association, if you were a black
Right.
doctor,
That's what you
you
went
went
to.
to the different one. And there were social clubs, and there were networks, and integration
Wipe those out.
wiped those out. They left because when black folks were given a choice, they moved.
Mm.
And they had enough social capital with enough white folks so that it could work. And again, what I was saying before is the black community is not special in that regard. They're just so large. There's just so many that you couldn't
Right.
keep
You can
those
bucket
things
it.
going.
Whereas the Jewish and Asian and Hispanic communities
Right.
were relatively smaller in the beginning.
And they didn't have the critical mass.
Yeah.
So that you could, let's put it very simple. We had a higher per capita Uncle Tom's.
Yeah.
Who could integrate.
Right.
Without much headache.
Right.
Okay? Who could get that marginal incremental thing. And that has happened so much. It has happened over multiple generations. So today, yes, because there's 42 million African Americans there are still black folks who are going, they're the first people in their family
Right.
to get into college. That's still happening right now.
Well, because what you've got is you have what I'll call the left behinds, right? To borrow Chris Arnaud's phrase, right? For the white people who live in the middle of the country.
There's
right. You have the left behind black folks who basically didn't get out when they could and got trapped in that cycle, and those kids are the first kids to go to college when you pull them out.
And just like poor kids in Indiana.
And it's funny because
kids in Indiana.
My theory has always been class first.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm much more kind of class focused than I am race focused, and maybe that's because of who I am, right? But it's the idea that your daughter's kids would be advantaged in getting into Yale over the kids of somebody who'd been homeless in Indiana, right?
Right. I mean, and
who
my
was
kids,
white or Asian.
My kids tell me this all the time. I didn't realize that we had these advantages. I mean, I just thought, as they go out in the world, they're discovering what
Right.
privileges they
The
have.
benefit, there are absolutely benefits
And
right now.
they didn't know.
How would they know? Because the narrative they've been given is completely different.
Right. So every generation of black culture has a different tuning of the drum.
So it's interesting. I think, so the points I'm taking away are, the anti-fragile point about as we build better lives for ourselves and our kids, we make ourselves weaker, in a sense.
Yes and no, because there's sooner or later, and we can certainly say this is true in the NBA. Sooner or later, you're going to have enough history where you can walk in and you may be third generation or fourth generation. When you get to third and fourth generation, you can run a national organization.
Yeah.
It becomes relatively simple there.
Yeah.
Like if you decided today that you want to be a sportscaster
Mm-hmm.
and you want to focus on football and you're a black woman, boom, boom, boom. You can walk right in. The path is there.
Yeah.
And it's not nepotism necessarily.
And where the path isn't yet is to being the national director of sports for a network.
Yeah. So
and
Brian Gumbel could do that.
And in theory that's the next kind of place to win.
And that's why I'm saying there's still a high level reach back that can be done.
Yeah.
At an executive management level, that's just happening industry by industry.
Well, think about it in the sense that, you're a little behind me in age, right? But we're kind of a generation.
Yeah.
And I think it's our generation is probably the first generation where the door was genuinely open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so what you're going to see is, and we're of the age when we're starting to be those executives.
Right. And I think the wokies are pushing it. They're trying. I mean,
I think they can make it worse. I don't think they can make it better.
Well, yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. The intentions under their feet
Mm-hmm.
are paved with gold, but they're wearing flip flops,
not
boots. There's the energy that you're saying, which is right, and it is about a connection to suffering that gives it a moral legitimacy.
Well, and I think
intent, but there are roads they just haven't walked down, and they think that stuff is startup fast possible.
I think it's different, and I think we ought to probably close on sort of a thought for next time.
Okay.
So my thought for next time is the downstroke of the cosmopolitanism that we both see as an advantage.
Yes.
Is a certain anomie and rootlessness that's easily accessible to people who can't find a grounding.
I call it the Karen's burden.
Yeah, the Karen's burden. I love it. Okay. And if I have anomie and rootlessness, what I need passion in my life.
Oh yeah.
Right? And what I want morally sound passion, because then I'm morally superior and I'm passionate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what the wokey culture brings with it is moral superiority and passion.
That's for sure.
And I think that honestly it's the drama of the lonely child, not the gifted child.
Yeah. They're all walking around with their signs. The end is near.
I know. And so, but that'll be a topic. I'm fascinated by this idea of losing my community by in essence integrating, of losing my community by losing my suffering, and that we eat the bitter herb every year, as part of Passover, to sort of symbolize the pain that our ancestors went through, and that if I don't have that bitter herb, if I don't get that, right, then am I really part of a community? Do I have a people?
Okay. Yeah, I think of it in terms of the alienation of modern society of urban life, in that paving over parkland takes you away from nature, and you are in a scalable society, which is very matrix-like, and there are certain very human things that you lose by not being out in the woods.
You lose skin knees.
Yeah, and so I think of it in terms of really, what do you lose by not living in a small town or a village,
mm-hmm.
and what every large city needs are villages. And it's, my sister is right on top of this. She says, we knew when we came home who we were.
Mm-hmm.
We never had to ask.
Yeah.
We always knew who we were as soon as that made us adventurers, and we could go out, but we never had to ask who we were.
That's right.
Because as soon as we came home, we knew.
But the downstroke of that is that you always were stuck being who you are, and you couldn't reimagine yourself, which is what the city brings with it.
Right.
And the problem is that most of the reimagining becomes kind of pathos, because I'm a barista who imagines myself a Broadway star, or I'm a delivery driver or an Uber driver who imagines myself as something.
Or I'm a black kid who grew up in the suburbs, and I have to imagine myself as a slave.
Yeah.
Or
a gangster.
To have the moral agency that gets the attention.
That's right.
Of people on
well, this is like my whole thing about the history of gangster rap, right? Where if you look at the background of most of the people who founded gangster rap, they're middle class kids.
Right. Yeah. Ice Cube.
Yeah. And and it's just one of these things where it's this sort of self-imagining but then what I love about it is it then starts reflecting itself in reality.
Yeah.
Did gangs create gangster rap, or did gangster rap create gangs?
These are pretty weak gangs. Well, that was good.
Good times, man.
Yeah.
Good times. Miss you.
Hey, that's right. We can touch now.
I know. Isn't that crazy? No tongue, though.
I thought I was going to get tattoos with 2 Band-Aids. Thank you for listening to American Wag. Join us again, won't you?